The desert night was suffocating, like a beast holding its breath, waiting to strike. The 7-Eleven stood alone, the only sign of life for miles, its neon sign flickering like a failing pulse. Inside, Amber's nerves were frayed, every second stretching into eternity. The store's fluorescent lights buzzed incessantly, casting a sickly, jaundiced glow that made everything feel wrong. Amber's gaze was glued to the clock. 15 minutes. That's all she needed to survive until the night shift ended. Just breathe, just a little longer, she whispered, her voice barely audible over the oppressive silence. But there was something heavy in the air tonight, something that made the hairs on her neck stand on end. And then, as if the night had decided to show its teeth, the ground beneath her trembled. A low, growling roar grew louder and louder, making the windows vibrate. Bright headlights sliced through the darkness, flooding the store with a blinding light. Amber's eyes widened, her heart racing as the motorcycles came to a snarling stop just outside the store. She whispered to herself, "Please, just keep driving." But her words were swallowed by the night. The bike stopped. The riders dismounted like shadows rising from the asphalt, their figures tall and menacing under the store's flickering lights. The leader moved first, a hulking man with a long, grizzled beard. He pushed through the glass door, the bell's cheerful ring out of place in the tense atmosphere. Amber's hands shook as she gripped the counter, her breath coming in shallow gasps. Sweat trickled down her back, her uniform sticking to her skin. The leader sauntered up, his grin wide and cruel.
"Evening, sweetheart. Looks like it's just you and me tonight."
His grin widened, the stench of alcohol and sweat rolling off him in nauseating waves. Amber fought the urge to recoil, her eyes darting to the silent alarm button beneath the counter.
What can I get you?"
Her voice was weak, barely a whisper against the heavy air. The leader's eyes, hidden behind dark sunglasses, seemed to pierce right through her. Behind him, his men were already spreading out, knocking over shelves, their laughter echoing through the small store.
"Hey boss, they've got the good stuff here. Mind if I help myself?"
The sound of shattering glass filled the air as a bottle hit the floor. Amber flinched, her eyes darting back to the alarm button. But the leader's grin turned into a sneer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down her spine. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as a bottle hit the floor. Amber flinched, her eyes darting back to the alarm button. But the leader's grin turned into a sneer, his voice dropping to a whisper that sent chills down her spine.
"Don't even think about it, darling. We're just here to have a little fun."
Amber's heart pounded so loudly she thought it would burst. She was trapped, the store closing in around her as the bikers continued to wreak havoc. Every second that passed felt like a countdown to something terrible, and she was running out of time.
What do you want?"
Her voice was barely a whisper, each word trembling with fear. The leader's grin only widened, showing yellow teeth. He leaned even closer, the smell of stale cigarettes and whiskey nearly making her gag.
"We just want to have some fun, sweetheart. Unless you got a problem with that."
Amber's pulse pounded in her ears. She tried to stand her ground, but her legs felt like jelly. She stole a quick glance toward the silent alarm button under the counter. It was so close, but the leader's eyes followed her movement, catching the flicker of hope in her gaze.
"Ah, I see what you're thinking. Go ahead, press your little button. Let's see if the cops can get here before we finish our visit."
Amber's hand froze, her heart sinking. He was calling her bluff, daring her to make a move. Sweat trickled down her temple as the other bikers closed in, surrounding her like wolves circling prey. They were getting bolder, their laughter louder, more manic.
"Hey, boss, think she's scared enough yet?"
But the leader's grin disappeared in an instant, replaced by a glare that could cut glass. The air in the store seemed to drop 10 degrees as he turned back to Amber, his voice a low growl.
"I don't like games, sweetheart. You try anything, and it's going to end badly for you."
The world around Amber seemed to narrow, the edges of her vision blurring as panic set in. She could feel her knees trembling, her breath coming in shallow gasps. But there was a fire in her eyes now, a glimmer of defiance that hadn't been there before.
You can't just do this. Someone will stop you.
For a moment, the leader seemed taken aback. Then he threw his head back and laughed. A harsh, grating sound that echoed through the store. The other bikers joined in, their laughter a chorus of cruel delight.
Oh, really? And who's gonna stop us? You.
Amber's fingers inched closer to the alarm button once more. Her eyes locked on the leader. She had to do something. Anything. But before she could make a move, the leader's hand shot out, gripping her wrist like a vice.
Nice try, darling. But it's too late for that.
The lights flickered ominously, casting the store in strobing shadows. Amber winced as the leader tightened his grip, pain shooting up her arm. In that moment, she realized just how dire her situation was. She was alone, surrounded, and no one was coming to save her. The store had become a battlefield, every aisle a potential trap. The bikers were closing in, their laughter filling the air like the cackling of vultures waiting for the kill. Amber's heart was pounding so hard it felt like it would burst right out of her chest. She was running out of options, and she knew it. The leader's grip on her wrist was iron tight, his smile a cruel slash across his bearded face. Amber's eyes darted toward the small, red button beneath the counter. It was her last chance, but the leader wasn't about to give her an opening.
What's the matter, sweetheart? You look a little tense.
Amber's breath hitched, her fingers trembling as she tried to pull free. The leader's breath was hot and sour against her face, his grip like a vice around her wrist. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced herself to stay calm.
Please, just let me go.
But the leader wasn't interested in mercy. He tightened his grip, his grin widening as he watched the fear flicker in her eyes. The other bikers were getting restless, their voices rising as they egged each other on.
Hey boss, think she's got any cash stashed under that counter? Let's see if she's holding out on us.
Amber's mind raced. The alarm button was so close, just inches away. She could feel the leader's grip loosening, distracted by the chaos his crew was causing. Now was her chance.
Come on, just a little more.
With a sudden burst of courage, Amber yanked her wrist free and slammed her palm down on the alarm button. For a split second, everything froze. The leader's eyes widened, a flash of surprise and fury crossing his face.
You little.
But before he could finish, the store erupted into chaos. A shrill alarm blared through the air, the sound so loud it rattled the windows. The bikers spun around, their expressions shifting from amusement to rage. The leader's hand shot out again, this time aiming for Amber's throat. Amber ducked just in time, slipping behind the counter as the bikers lunged for her. She could hear their boots thudding against the tile, the sound like a drumbeat in her ears. She had seconds, maybe less, before they reached her.
Grab her. Shut that damn alarm off.
Amber's hands were shaking so badly she could barely think, but she had one last trick up her sleeve. Reaching under the counter, she pulled out a small can of pepper spray, her fingers closing around it like a lifeline.
Back off, or I swear I'll use this.
The bikers hesitated, the leader's eyes narrowing as he sized her up. For a moment, Amber thought they might actually back down, but then the leader let out a low, cruel laugh.
Go ahead, little girl. Let's see if you got the guts.
The challenge hung in the air like a knife's edge. Amber's heart was racing, her pulse thundering in her ears. She was outnumbered, outmatched, and alone, but she wasn't ready to give up just yet. The shrill sound of the alarm echoed through the small store, sending the situation spiraling out of control. Amber's hands trembled, her grip tightening around the small can of pepper spray. The bikers surrounded her like wolves closing in on their prey, their eyes glinting with malice. For a moment, the leader's laughter cut through the alarm's wail like a knife. He took another step forward, his grin widening as if he was savoring the moment. Amber's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear her own thoughts. But she had to act fast. If she hesitated, it would be over.
What's the matter, princess? Scared to pull the trigger? Let's see if you got the guts.
Amber's eyes locked onto his, her fear replaced by a spark of defiance. Without a second thought, she pressed down on the canister. A spray of burning mist exploded from the nozzle, catching the leader square in the face. He screamed, stumbling back, his hands tangled.
You little heart.
Amber's breath came in short, panicked gasps as she darted through the narrow aisles, her sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor. She could hear the biker's heavy boots pounding behind her, gaining ground with every second. Her only hope was the emergency exit at the back, but it was blocked by shelves and debris.
Come on, think.
She skidded to a halt near the frozen food section, her eyes frantically scanning for anything she could use to slow them down. Grabbing a heavy mop bucket, she tipped it over, spilling soapy water across the floor. The bikers behind her cursed as they slipped, their feet sliding out from under them.
Not so fast, sweetheart. You're not going anywhere.
Amber's scream was cut short as she was slammed against the wall, her vision swimming. The bikers closed in around her, their faces twisted with anger and frustration. But the sound of distant sirens pierced the air, a flicker of hope in an otherwise hopeless situation.
You better run. The cops are coming.
For a moment, the bikers hesitated, their eyes darting toward the front of the store where the wailing sirens were growing louder. The leader, still clutching his burning eyes, snarled in fury. But even he knew they were out of time.
Let's get out of here, boys. This isn't over, girl. We'll be back.
The bikers fled, their engines roaring to life outside as they sped off into the night. Amber slumped against the wall, her knees giving out as tears washed over her. The flashing lights of the approaching police cars painted the store in red and blue, but for Amber, it felt like the first light she'd seen in hours. The flashing red and blue lights outside the 7-Eleven cast long, strobing shadows through the shattered windows. Amber clung to the wall, her breath coming in ragged gasps as she tried to steady herself. The sirens were getting closer, but they weren't here yet. She wasn't safe, not yet. Just as she thought she might have a chance to catch her breath, the emergency door she fought so hard to reach burst open. The leader stormed in, his eyes red and swollen from the pepper spray. Rage etched into every line of his face.
You think a can of spray is enough to stop me? I told you this isn't over.
Amber's heart dropped. The man looked like something out of a nightmare, his face twisted with pain and rage. She tried to back away, but there was nowhere left to run. The wall was cold against her back, her hands scrambling for anything she could use as a weapon.
Leave now, the cops are almost here. You can't get away this time.
But the leader wasn't listening. He lunged forward, his hand reaching out like a claw. In that split second, Amber's fingers closed around something cold and heavy. Without thinking, she swung it with all her strength, a metal flashlight she had grabbed from a nearby shelf. The sound of metal meeting bone was sickening. The leader staggered, a look of shock crossing his face as he stumbled back, clutching his head. But Amber had no time to celebrate her small victory. The other bikers were already pouring in through the emergency door, their expressions murderous.
She's done for. Get her.
Amber's vision blurred with tears, her arms shaking from the effort. But she wasn't ready to give up. She turned and sprinted toward the front of the store, dodging overturned shelves and broken glass. The sirens were blaring louder now, the flashing lights flooding the store like a beacon of hope. But the bikers were faster. She could hear their heavy boots thudding against the tile, getting closer with every step. Amber's lungs burned, her legs threatening to give out. But she pushed on, her mind locked on a single goal: survival.
Please, just a little further.
She burst through the front doors just as the first police cars skidded to a halt in the parking lot. The screech of tires was like music to her ears. But even as she ran toward the flashing lights, she heard the roar of a motorcycle engine behind her.
You're not getting away. Not this time.
The leader's bike was barreling straight toward her, his eyes wild with desperation. Amber's feet felt like they were moving through quicksand, every step slower than the last. The gap was closing fast, and the police officers were still too far away to intervene. Amber's mind raced. She had only seconds left. In a last-ditch effort, she grabbed a handful of gravel from the ground and flung it into the biker's face. The sudden move made him swerve, his bike skidding out of control. He crashed into a row of shopping carts. The impact sent Amber collapsed to her knees, her body trembling from exhaustion and adrenaline. The officers finally reached her, pulling her to safety as they surrounded the fallen bikers. The leader lay in a heap, groaning, as the officers snapped cuffs onto his wrists.
You're safe now, miss. It's over.
But as Amber looked around at the flashing lights, the chaos, and the broken bodies scattered across the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. The leader's glare burned into her soul as they dragged him away, his lips curling into a twisted smile.
Thank you for dropping by. See you on the next video. Hope you enjoy it all.